The idea that an 8-year-old child or a 10-year-old child decides, I decided I want to be transgender. That's what I think I'd like to be. It'll make my life a lot easier. There should be zero discrimination. And what's happening is too many transgender women of color are being murdered. They're being murdered. I mean, I think it's up to now 17. Don't hold me to that number, but it's higher now.
Yeah.
And that's just this year. And so I promise you, there is no reason to suggest that there should be any right denied your daughter or daughters, whichever, if one or two, one, your daughter, that your other daughter has a right to be and do. None, zero.
And welcome back to the Exceptional Conservative Show, live from the nation's capital. I'm your host, Ken McClinton. Tonight we're dealing with one of the worst endorsements I have ever heard in American history by a presidential candidate. The whole idea of gender transitioning for children. I couldn't think of anyone more apt to talk on this particular issue, to bring it into resonance so that we can understand it, and why the worst thing you can do now is vote for anyone that endorses that behavior on the part of adults treating children. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Reisman, Judith Reisman, from the Reisman Institute. Good evening, Judith. It's a great honor and pleasure to have you on the air with us tonight. First and foremost, tell us, what is the Reisman Institute? Why do you do what you do?
Well, the Reisman Institute is a spin-off of the Child Protection Institute, and it is the Child Protection Institute in effect as well. We are a group of people who devote ourselves really essentially to education and to research, to identify what's been going on in our country for so many years. And what we do is not apparently done by others. We try to fill that gap. And one of the big gaps is, where did we come from? How did we get to the point where a presidential aspirant would actually recommend that children have the right to, or they don't have the right, they are induced to adopt ideas that allow them, with their confusion, to think that they are members of the opposite sex. And this is what's going on. And what is involved in that, of course, is we go back to Dr. Alfred Kinsey in 1948, and he he did the book in 1948, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, and then in 1953, Sexual Behavior in the Human Female. And in those books, which if you had the slides, that would be very nice, but you don't, but that's okay. People should go on my website. Yeah. And you can see that he claimed in those years that children as young as 2 months, as young as 5 months, could be orgasmic if they were helped by older people. Yeah. And he did that with thousands, 2,035 children. Now, the idea that children are sexual from birth, became established by the Rockefeller Foundation, who funded this sexual revolution, is what they called it. And they called Kinsey's role in that their funding of it. They're funding the sexual revolution. Well, the sexual revolution tells you why we are where we are. We are teaching in the schoolroom from K through 12 that children are sexual from birth, that they can have sex with other members of the same sex or opposite sex or whatever, at different places and times, that sodomy is we had so many laws in place in 1948 that we absolutely abandoned that were protecting children.
Doctor, there are people who are watching tonight. I'm sitting back and mouth wide open. I'm aghast at the whole idea that Dr. Kinsey is idolized, knowing that he sexually or at least induced the sexual abuse of over 2,000 children, some of which were infants.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
let me.
The Indiana University, I mean, it's named after him, the Kinsey Institute at Indiana University. Of course, they are major supporters of transgenders, transitioning from one gender to the other. They absolutely are key people to identify the transgender movement as part of their movement, so to speak.
Dr. Reisman, first I got to remove all the shock for having to hold this discussion. But
yeah,
are you certain that an 8-year-old child doesn't know whether he wants to be a she or she a he, that they know the future of what they want to be? Are you certain of that?
of course they don't know. We know from the standpoint of, for goodness sakes, science, thank you very much for science, but that's no news to mothers and fathers, to normal mothers and fathers, to that their child is a child. That's why they're called child, child, and that's why adults are adults. There's a difference, and there is a difference in their brains. Dr. Jay Geed of the Institute not human sexuality, the government institution, yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Dr. Jay Geed, who did the work on adolescent brain scans from their earliest kindergarten through to age 25, has identified all that material is available. It's available for people immediately, and he identifies the difference between the child as it goes through middle school. It's not capable of making, adult cognitive rational decisions, through to high school, junior high school, to approximately age 21 to 25. That's when the cognitive abilities of the human brain kick in sufficiently. They don't have any experience. Experience is critical in terms of your ability to make a decision, a sane decision. And so where does that influence come from? Well, it comes really from a couple of places. It comes, unfortunately, too often from their parents. Yeah.
Yes.
Although some parents have fought against it, but many parents who get their thrills or their fulfillment from their children being celebrated in these unusual ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
Those parents will urge their children, boys or girls, to be the opposite sex, and it's unfortunately it's becoming more and more common. They are increasing. The chart is off. It's off the charts now.
Exactly.
You started off with a few kids, and now you're moving into thousands. Well, that's standard behavior in terms of conditioning, in terms of conditioning a group to urge, to yearn for something else. And I would tell you, the parents in particular, I see this as examples of Munchausen by proxy. which is a situation, you've heard of that, where, you know, parents would bring their children into a hospital pretty regularly and say, she's got an injury here, she's got something that's wrong there, and so on and so on. Munchausen by proxy. And it turns out what's happening to the child is happening at home. And
Yes.
that is being called something that the parent is trying to prevent. Well, one of the big things that's happening at home these days is pornography. That's the big elephant in the room.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of these parents, are themselves, the women as well as the men, the women as well as the men, are very much exposed to pornography, and they begin to see their children as reflections of themselves, as they would like to be,
So
and the popularity they would like to have.
You're saying that parents who are sexual beings start seeing their children as sexual beings.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's it.
A child does not have, when they are when they're children, they do not have these sexual ideas and ideations and so on. They are able to be children, and at age 8, age 10, 11 these days, what's going on all over the country, all over the world. Children are being pushed, shoved, kicked, drawn into the over-sexualized society that we have created, and it's happening in the schoolroom as well as at home.
Dr. Reisman with us tonight from the Reisman Institute down at Liberty University in Southern Virginia. Dr. Reisman, I understand you have such expertise in this area, but you couldn't possibly understand children the way that Dwayne Wade and his wife understands their gender fluid child, or Will Smith and Jada Pinkett, their gender fluid child, or Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt and their transition child. If they do that, can't you possibly be wrong, Dr. Reisman?
No. No, I'm afraid not. The child is a reflection of their parents.
Mm-hmm.
The child will do the kinds of things that they suspect they know are desired by their parents. They want to have be elevated in the eyes of their parents. And little boys will want to be little girls if the parents are fussing over the little girls and what they wear, instead of the little boys. I mean, most girls, when we were young, which was a long time ago,
just a short period.
We used to climb trees and ride horses and call ourselves tomboys. That was okay, because in those years we didn't have the sexualized environment that we have today. I mean, Angelina Jolie should know quite well about the sexualized environment we have today. I mean, she's very much a part of that, as is all of Hollywood, for the most part. I mean, this Me Too movement didn't come out of the air, all that kind of sexual stuff that's been going on for years and years and years. Well, that was the environment they created in Hollywood. And that is an environment that has been displayed to the world as normal, as desirable. I mean, come on. If you see pictures of these ladies when they don't have all the makeup on, versus when we do have all the makeup on, so they look like these lovely, glamorous, well, I think they look pretty good without it, but I guess they don't think so. And when they do films and they display themselves in films in highly provocative ways, they are imitating, they are acting out what little kids are seeing. The kids are watching that. They know the kids are watching that. And
So
yeah, so it becomes a foregone conclusion that we will have really children with great psychological problems.
now, Dr. Reisman, there are those who happen to be in what I would consider open and moral atmospheres and attitudes, and they believe that children have gender dysphoria. So much so that it has become an industry, a multi-billion dollar industry.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, first and foremost, in your scientific well knowledge, what is gender dysphoria, and why the heck the kids in my generation didn't have that? I just
You
want to
didn't
know.
have it. Yeah, well, the kids in your generation had colds,
Yeah.
They had colds. They could have measles, no, although that was pretty much wiped out. But they had all kinds of things. But they didn't have gender dysphoria. Yeah, they
Yeah.
did not. What you're saying. Well, we know that most of the children who see themselves as the opposite sex, I think it's well over 80%. Yeah, get over that if you leave them alone and let
Yeah.
them go about their business. Okay. So that tells you there's something wrong. Okay, but what that also doesn't tell you is that the pharmaceutical industry and the medical industry today is now really making a fortune from at the psychological industry, psychiatrists, psychologists, gender dysphoria psychologists, and so forth, and all these centers that have organized all over the country out of Tavistock in the UK, where it all started. Yeah, they have centers where people you go in with a child and you say, my child doesn't feel like my child is a girl. Well, if you were a tomboy, you would say, I want to be a boy, right?
Yeah.
I want to climb the trees. I want to do all those things my brother does. Why can't I do them? So now they say, well, we'll make sure medically give you hormones, because you're probably a boy, really, inside, right?
Mm.
Well, they'll give them hormones, and later on they can take off their body parts, surgically. These children will never be able to bear children of their own. I mean, these are the experiences that they will never have. These are things they could never know. And who would let their child? I'm not saying everybody is psychotic who does this.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of people could be just incredibly conditioned, or frightened. Yeah, well, who knows? But the fact is, there is absolutely no way that child can give informed consent to what is going to be done to them hormonally and then surgically. We know one of the first cases was the John Jane or John. What was it? I've forgotten the other name they gave. It was the boy in the 1950s, 60s, and he had a problem, in birth, he was sort of surgically castrated,
Mm-hmm.
and this little boy grew up, started to grow up, but his parents were convinced by the medical professionals, that was Dr. John Money at the time,
Mm-hmm.
that the boy, little Jane or John, that he could really just be a girl. You just cut it all off, at the right time, and you'll have a girl. The only thing Dr. John Money of Johns Hopkins said was, well, she'll be a perfectly fine little girl, except that you won't be able to have babies. Well, it turned out that John Money, of course, was lying all
Yes.
along. He was publishing papers that lied. He was making up the data. No question about that. The boy was part of twins, so he got the little boy to perform with his twin brother pornographic scenes at Johns Hopkins, which he filmed. Yeah, I mean, he was a psychopathy, is putting it mildly. He was a very disturbed man, and so they created this false narrative that was distributed all across the country, that he was a fine little girl, a happy little girl, until, of course, it turned out that he was not, and at all. And when he was, I don't know, it was an older teen, he
Yeah.
decided something was wrong. His parents said, "Well, to tell you the truth, you were born a girl," which is what's the reality. That
Mhm.
is the reality. And he said, "I knew it. I knew it in my, I knew I was not a boy. I mean, a girl. I
Yeah.
knew it." And so he ended up marrying a woman who had children. He survived a bit, and then he and his brother both committed suicide. You
Yeah.
can't do this to children. You can't play experimental cut and paste games with children. You have to show them respect. We used to call that what was being done by the Nazis, in across the water there. And
Experimentation.
we understood experimentation, and we understood what it was and what it caused, and it has not changed.
I've had the pleasure of interviewing Walt Heyer three
Ah,
times
yeah,
on my show.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
it was his coming to Jesus that broke him out of the debilitating thought that if I change my sex, I could improve my life outcomes.
yeah,
For some strange reason, he went through a period of depression. He had a sex change operation, remained a woman for 8 years, and then the Jesus moment came, and he decided he needed to go back to being a man. What
yeah,
happens, however, when you start, because he's an adult, that it worked out, God
yeah,
bless.
yeah,
But we're talking
yeah.
about 6 year olds, 8 year olds,
Children.
10 year olds who are getting hormone treatment. Can you talk about what that does to the human body?
Well, they will become infertile.
Ooh,
That is for sure. Uh, they will become infertile. They will have You don't do these operations on the human body without having some pretty serious results. You get a cut on your leg, right?
yeah,
And sometimes it becomes infected. Well, we have all kinds of problems associated with this surgical stuff that's going on, and we don't know half, and not even that much, because we've just started experimenting with these children, right?
yeah,
We will know. We do know that okay, suicidal ideation is standard, and suicide is common with a lot of these children, yeah, who
yes,
have gone through the transition. Not so the ones who have not transitioned, but who thought that they needed to transition, right?
yes.
So there are all kinds of medical problems that are associated with this kind of behavior outside of psychological problems. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
those are enormous.
Doctor,
We
how 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 can how can you look into the eye of an 8 year old kid
Mhm.
who tells you I'm depressed and I want to be a different sex, and you say that's reasonable? What kind of doctor does that?
Well, in my opinion, it's the kind of doctor that really ought to face uh, some legal
Hmm.
ramifications, because they have to know that the child's brain is not capable of making that decision. They have to know. That's no secret. You don't even have to be a mother or a father to understand that children. Come on, it's difficult. You try and get a child to eat healthy. Here, eat your vegetables, right? Yeah,
Yes.
they don't. Yeah, I mean, they well, do they choose what they get to eat? Child wants to have a child wants to have chocolate cake all day long for the rest of his life. Do they get to choose that? What kind of parent would allow that? No. So there are parents who are being coerced. There are parents who are sure they are being mean if they don't recognize that their child wants to be a boy or wants to be a girl. As I said, the schools are teaching this. Our schools have what we call the obscenity exemption, an obscenity exemption,
Really.
which you probably don't know about. And that was put into most of our states so that what we cannot give the child outside of school, you can't give a child obscenity, you can't give an adult obscenity, pass out obscenity outside of school. But you can do it in school under this so-called obscenity exemption for educators and education. Okay, this exemption originally was couched in for police, for medical persons. They should be exempt because that means they have to have this material. Sometimes they have to examine it.
Yes.
Well, why do you think we have so much scene material in the schools? Because the schools have an obscenity exemption. And think about this, we're looking at a massive problem with teacher abusers in school, teacher
Yes.
predators, and not just grammar school, but professors. Yeah, massive problem with where does everybody think this all came from? Anyway, but also the APA did an amazing piece of work, which should be done every year by our government, but it's not being done. I urge the president to immediately, put it together, looking at how many children sexually abused other children in our schools. It
Yes.
was 13,000 to 17,000, and it was in a 2 or 3
Really?
year period. Yes, yes. And when I sexually abused, I hope you have an adult audience.
Yes.
It was not just rape,
Oh.
and not just rape and sodomy, but also object penetration
Oh
and
God.
forced fondling. Now, children don't know these things unless they learn it from pornography and from watching it's like this film Cuties, where they watch the pornography and they imitate. Yes, of course they do. Your brain has mirror neurons which teach you what the guy next door, what you see, you can imitate. You mirror that in your body. Well, that's not news. And so when you have an obscenity exemption K through 12,
Yeah.
and you have teachers who have problems themselves, shall we say, pedophiles, or I call them
Yes.
pedosadists, because they're not lovers of children. When you have pedosadists in a school, who are the administrators, who are the teachers, perhaps, who create the programs and so on, and they start distributing material that's obscene,
Oh.
that's legal, the children in mass are being infected in mass. And we let it happen on our watch. We let it happen on our watch.
This is a great introductory conversation we will have Dr. Reisman for the next 3 Fridays talking about this abuse. What presidential candidate Joe Biden endorsed was child abuse. I'll give Dr. Reisman
Absolutely.
the opportunity to define what exactly is child abuse and how is gender transitioning child abuse.
Well, child abuse can be physical, if it's, physical abuse,
Yes.
beating, battering, slapping bad. I don't mean just, but really
Yeah.
abusing a child physically. Sexual child abuse is defined as add the sexual component that is for fondling. It doesn't have to be forced, not at all.
Mm-hmm.
The force is not a component that is needed, that you have to prove it was forced. Um, it's simply a person who is, unfortunately, they've made a differentiation in terms of age differentiation, but not necessarily a person
Mm-hmm.
who fondles a child sexually, who engages in any kind of sexual interaction, shows a child pornography. By the way, showing a child pornography is sexual abuse,
Mm.
absolutely. But if it's done in school, they have permission, right?
Wow.
Yeah, any age, K through 12. So because under that rubric, and that came through basically, okay, why? Because the LGBT, well, it wasn't even T at the time, the LGB
Mm-hmm.
population, uh, the parents said that we have children in the school who are my child, another child is LGB. And the teachers were given the carte blanche to start talking about what sex acts often, not always, but this was an entry, what sex acts these LGBT were engaged in or could be engaged in. They didn't want these kids to feel that they were ostracized because they were doing something peculiar, which of course they were. But the point is, none of those kids were supposed to be learning about sex in school. They were not. None of them were supposed to be learning about the sodomies and so on and so on. It's illegal for children to have sex with other children, right? It's
Yes.
illegal for them to have sex with adults. So you don't teach them what to do. I mean, you want to teach people to stop smoking. You don't give them cigarettes and say, well, let's light up everybody and look
Don't
at
do this.
yeah, and look at those sexy actors and actresses that are doing this. No,
Exactly.
yeah. So that's what's going on, and our kids are so confused. It is so unfair.
Dr.
It is
Reitzman,
so cruel.
uh, you'll be back with us next Friday. This was a good introduction to why gender transitioning is child abuse. And a lot of people, in closing, would say that we are antiquated, that we are Bible thumpers, that we don't understand modernity, that we are well behind the times and we need to catch up. If you could, because again, I talked with Walter Heyer, we're going to try to get him back on our show next week to talk about that. If you had a presidential candidate who said the LGBTQRSUVWXYZ and the P was the number one
Yeah,
legislative priority,
that's right.
is he giving you the code to tell you that this will become the wild, wild west of the LGBTQ agenda in America?
Yeah, in my opinion, yes, absolutely. It will be, and I guarantee it will be the LGBTQ with a P, because the pedophile or pedosadist,
Hmm.
that's, everybody knows that's on the docket. It's out there. It's in black and white. It's clear. It's in color. Glowing. You know, from the headlights everywhere.
Yeah.
That's what's coming.
How
Yeah,
come?
that is what's coming.
How come you and I see this, and everyone else is like, you know, it's just life. The dangers, the depression, the fact that homosexual couples are more violent than heterosexual couples. How come we are considered the malicious ones for being so honest and truthful about sexual relationships in the world?
Well, I think it just, you've had three generations of young people and teachers and lawyers trained to believe, starting with the Kinsey, but before that, actually, we won't go into all that. But
Yeah.
Kinsey really spun it off. The big change after he did the science was that Hugh Hefner, who was a virgin at age 22, who was a virgin at age 22 in college, like most guys were, and I can
Yeah.
testify to that, being
Hmm.
old enough to do so. He said he read Kinsey, and he said, "Oh my gosh, everybody's been lying to me all this time. My parents, everybody's been doing all this. You have to get my books. Everybody's
Yes.
been doing all this sexy stuff, and I am the only one who has been out in the cold." He said, "I will be Kinsey's pamphleteer." Now,
Mm.
from Hugh Hefner comes Playboy. From Playboy, 15 years later comes Penthouse. From Penthouse, 10 years later comes Hustler.
Yes.
Okay. And the stream of pornography, of a pornified culture across the length and breadth of not just the United States, because we are the leaders, yeah,
Hmm.
but globally, yeah,
Yeah.
everywhere. And it has permeated our, not the it's the air. It has permeated our air. It has permeated the pores of our body. You cannot see this. Well, you cannot see various films today without knowing that it has permeated. It's permeated our humor, our sense of humor. Where has that gone? um, you can't have humor unless it's four
Vulgar.
letters.
Yeah.
Yes, it. And when the protesters protest, what they call the protesters, their protesting is four-letter words. If it's not burning the place down, so
Exactly.
the change in our character, the massive change in our character, is reflected by three generations of education, miseducation.
Mm.
And how you correct that in a day, I don't know. You have to be old.
You know, in closing here, and I thank you so much for being with us tonight, and I look forward to you being back with us over the next two Fridays, with a town hall at 7 o'clock on October 30th, where we talk about these issues, sexual abuse of children. And next week, I want to talk with you about Kinsey and the LGBTQ RSTUVWXYZ and the P movement.
Sad, so sad.
And in addition to that, how governmental officials are slyly introducing child abuse as legality, a legal option in America. I want to talk with you about that.
Yeah,
But in
yeah.
closing, the Hebrews had to walk around for 40 years to try to forget their Egyptian sins and appreciations. Uh, we may have to go through 40 years before we get our generations in right order. Dr. Reisman, thank you and God bless you. Thank you so much for the work that you do. How can people support your work? Do you take funding, donations?
Oh yeah, anybody who wants to, who wants to contribute, say 2, 3, 4 million. We're always welcome. Whatever. But other than that, buy my books and read and go on my website and watch a lot of the videos that are there, the documentaries, which really people are so bogged down with so much today, although they're home a lot.
Yeah.
That those videos, those documentaries are extraordinary. Oh, and we have a major documentary on WETN on the gender issue right now. It's I forgot what it's called, but anyway, it's a big 2-hour documentary on gender issues.
Yeah. If you suggest that to me, I'll put it on my television network. We will play it.
Good.
So people can
Good.
see it.
Oh, good.
I've been running over and over the movie regarding YouTube and Google and Facebook and what they're doing, turning us into slaves.
Oh, yeah.
The same thing is beginning.
That was the blue.
The creepy
blue line.
Exactly.
Yeah. Poor things. He's stuck with that name. Epstein's work. Very good work.
Exactly. Doctor, thank you. God bless you. We look forward to seeing you next week.
God bless you. And don't forget, you're going to be visiting with John Ulner.
Yes. Next Friday, right after your interview, we'll be talking with John Ulner, who is one of the world's leading psychotherapists who works with prisoners who have these issues, and we'll talk about that in great detail. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my God.
Bye-bye.
I'm going to tell you, I've interviewed senators and congressmen and, all that kind of stuff. But this is probably one of the greatest joys when you actually sit down with someone who has done the work that she has done. We will make certain next week we have the charts, the books, you can buy them. But the best thing you can do right now is go to the Reisman Institute. You can find that over the internet. DuckDuckGo it. Reisman Institute. You can also go to the Facebook page and like it. And I will tell you, if you watch tonight and you go to Facebook, 3 cheers. Give 3 cheers to the good doctor, for she has done well in this world. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back right after these messages.
The idea that an 8-year-old child or a 10-year-old child decides, I decided I want to be transgender. That's what I think I'd like to be. It'll make my life a lot easier. There should be zero discrimination. And what's happening is too many transgender women of color are being murdered. They're being murdered. I mean, I think it's up to now 17. Don't hold me to that number, but it's higher now.
Yeah.
And that's just this year. And so I promise you, there is no reason to suggest that there should be any right denied your daughter or daughters, whichever, one or two, your daughter, that your other daughter has a right to be and do. None, zero.